Susan Smith. There are women who grieve loudly, and there are women who perform grief. One wears the face of a mother destroyed, the other wears a mask. And the most terrifying truth about Susan Smith is that for 9 full days, an entire nation could not tell the difference. She stood before cameras, she wept on cue, she begged for mercy from a man who did not exist, and somewhere beneath all of that, beneath every manufactured tear, she already knew where her boys were. She had always known. The question that still haunts the people of Union, South Carolina, the question that haunts anyone who has ever looked into the eyes of a grieving parent and believed them, is this: how do you look at a mother and see a monster hiding inside? Susan Smith was 23 years old in October of 1994, living in the kind of small southern town where everyone knew your name and trusted your face. She was young, she was pretty, and she was in the middle of a quiet personal crisis that the outside world knew nothing about. Her marriage to David Smith had collapsed. She was carrying on a secret relationship with a wealthy local man named Tom Findlay, a man who had recently written her a letter that would become one of the most damning pieces of evidence in American legal history. In that letter, Findlay told her plainly that while he cared for her, he was not prepared to take on the responsibility of raising another man's children. 2 little boys, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, stood between Susan Smith and the future she wanted. And in the darkest corner of her mind, a plan began to form. On the night of October 25th, 1994, Susan drove her 2 sons to the edge of John D. Long Lake, a quiet stretch of water just outside of Union. She unbuckled her own seatbelt, stepped out of the car, released the handbrake, and stood at the water's edge as her burgundy Mazda protege rolled slowly down the boat ramp and disappeared beneath the surface, her children still strapped into their car seats inside. Then she drove to a nearby home, knocked on the door in a state of apparent hysteria, and told the story that would consume the nation. A black man had carjacked her at a red light. He had driven off with her boys still in the back seat. She had no idea where they were. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The FBI was deployed. A nationwide search consumed the headlines. The faces of Michael and Alex were broadcast on every major network. Yellow ribbons appeared on trees throughout Union. Prayer vigils filled the churches. David Smith, her estranged husband, stood beside her at press conferences, and the 2 of them pleaded with the imaginary carjacker to please bring their babies home. Susan's performance was so convincing, so layered with the texture of real maternal anguish, that the world wept alongside her. But investigators were watching something the cameras could not fully capture. Behind closed doors, her story kept shifting in ways that were small but significant. Her description of the carjacker was frustratingly vague. Her emotional responses during formal interviews felt rehearsed, almost clinical. She failed multiple polygraph examinations, and as the days wore on, the profile of a mysterious armed stranger began to fade, and the profile of the grieving mother herself came sharply into focus. On the 9th day, Sheriff Howard Wells sat across from Susan Smith and told her quietly, with the weight of certainty behind every word, they knew there had been no carjacker. The architecture of her lie collapsed in an instant. She broke down and confessed to a crime that would permanently alter the emotional landscape of the country. The car was located by a dive team, submerged in 18 feet of murky lake water. Michael and Alex were recovered, still in their seats, just as she had left them. The trial that followed was a collision of 2 portraits: the prosecution's cold, calculated killer who had invented a racist lie to cover her tracks, and the defense's fragile, psychologically damaged woman whose history of depression, childhood trauma, and instability had pushed her past the point of rational thought. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of murder. They chose not to pursue the death penalty, sentencing her instead to life in prison. As of Tuesday, August 26, 2025, Susan Smith is 53 years old and is incarcerated at Leith Correctional Institution in South Carolina. She became eligible for parole for the first time in November of 2024. The public outcry was swift and unrelenting. For the people who remember Michael and Alex, no amount of time behind bars will ever feel like enough. Diane Downs. Think about what it takes to sit in front of a camera, smile, and calmly reenact the night your children were shot. Not weep through it, not break down in the middle of it, smile through it. Most people watching Diane Downs on television in the spring of 1983 assumed she was simply coping in an unusual way, that grief can wear strange faces, and that nobody should judge a mother in the middle of the worst experience of her life. But there is a point where unusual becomes impossible to explain. There is a point where the behavior stops being strange grief and starts being something far colder. Diane Downs crossed that line before she ever sat in front of those cameras. She crossed it on a dark rural road in Oregon, with a gun in her hand and her 3 children in the car. On the night of May 19th, 1983, a blood-covered car pulled up to the emergency room entrance of Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. Behind the wheel was 27-year-old Diane Downs. In the back seat were her 3 children, 8-year-old Christy, 7-year-old Cheryl, and 3-year-old Danny, each of them suffering from gunshot wounds. Cheryl was already beyond saving. Christy and Danny were fighting for their lives. Diane herself had a wound to her forearm, minor enough that it required far less attention than she seemed to believe it deserved. Her account of what happened was delivered with an unsettling composure. She told hospital staff and investigators that a bushy-haired stranger had stepped into the road, flagged her down, and when she stopped, opened fire on everyone inside the car before vanishing into the darkness. It was the kind of story that should have produced nothing but sympathy and urgency. Instead, from the very first moments at that hospital, something felt profoundly wrong. While doctors fought to stabilize Christy and Danny, Diane's primary concern was not their condition. According to hospital personnel, she repeatedly asked about the whereabouts of a man named Robert Knickerbocker, a married man she had been pursuing with an intensity that had already alarmed people in her life. She was calm in ways that a mother in that situation should not be calm, and she was distracted in ways that told investigators everything they needed to know about where her mind actually was. The investigation shifted direction almost immediately. Detectives assigned to the case found themselves less interested in the phantom stranger and more interested in the woman who had described him. Her version of events changed in ways that were subtle but telling. Her emotional state was wildly inconsistent. Tears one moment, laughter the next, a strange theatrical quality that followed her through every interaction. When she agreed to a televised interview and smiled her way through a reenactment of the shooting, the public response was one of collective unease. Detectives, watching the same footage, felt something closer to certainty. What the investigation uncovered was a motive as straightforward as it was devastating. Diane's journals, seized by investigators, were filled with obsessive entries about Knickerbocker. She loved him with the kind of consuming, irrational fixation that leaves no room for perspective. And Knickerbocker had been clear with her. He loved his wife, he was staying in his marriage, and he had no desire to step into the role of father to her children. For Diane, that rejection had apparently pointed toward a single, monstrous solution. If the children were no longer there, the obstacle would be removed. The logic was as simple and as horrifying as that. For months, the case lacked the one thing prosecutors needed most, a direct witness to place Diane as the shooter. That witness existed, but she was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from a catastrophic injury to her brain that had temporarily stolen her ability to speak. Christy Downs, 8 years old and braver than anyone had a right to ask her to be, spent months in painstaking rehabilitation. District Attorney Fred Hughey visited her regularly, building trust one quiet conversation at a time. When the moment finally came and he asked her who had shot her, Christy's answer was delivered without hesitation. She said it was her mother. At trial, Christy took the stand and told the court what had happened on that road. Her testimony was the emotional and legal foundation on which the entire case rested. Diane, meanwhile, arrived at court, visibly pregnant, a calculated attempt to present herself as a nurturing figure even as survivors testified to what she had done. The jury was unconvinced. In June of 1984, Diane Downs was convicted of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. As of Tuesday, August 26, 2025, Diane Downs is 70 years old and remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility, still maintaining her innocence, still blaming a man who was never there. Andrea Yates. There is a category of tragedy that the human mind resists processing, not because it is too violent and not because it is too rare, but because it forces a confrontation with something deeply uncomfortable about the nature of suffering itself. When a person commits an act of unthinkable harm while in the grip of a reality that exists only inside a shattered mind, the world demands a simple answer: monster or victim, and the truth refuses to cooperate. Andrea Yates did not fit neatly into either category. She was a devoted mother, a former nurse, a woman of deep and sincere faith, and she was also a woman whose mind had been quietly, catastrophically failing for years. While the people around her hoped it would somehow stabilize on its own, it did not stabilize. And on a June morning in 2001, 5 children paid the price for every warning that was heard and then set aside. Andrea Kennedy grew up in Houston, Texas, one of 5 children in a Catholic household. She was disciplined, academically gifted, and deeply conscientious, the kind of person who carried the weight of responsibility as though it had been assigned to her at birth. She trained as a nurse, excelled in her career, and in 1993 married Russell Yates, a NASA engineer who shared her devout Christian faith. Together, they settled in the Houston suburb of Clear Lake and began building what appeared from the outside to be an admirable family. Noah came first, then John, then Paul, then Luke, and finally a daughter named Mary. 5 children in 7 years, raised in a home where faith was the organizing principle of daily life, and where Andrea poured every available hour into homeschooling, nurturing, and caring for each of them. But the picture that the outside world saw was not the picture that existed inside Andrea's mind. Following the birth of her 4th child, she suffered a complete psychological collapse, 2 attempts to end her own life, multiple hospitalizations, and a diagnosis of severe postpartum depression layered with psychotic features. The doctors who treated her were not ambiguous in their warnings. They told her and Russell in clear terms that another pregnancy carried an enormous risk of triggering a catastrophic psychiatric episode. And yet, a 5th child followed. Mary was born in November of 2000, and almost immediately, Andrea's condition began its final, irreversible descent. She stopped eating, she stopped speaking, she scratched bald patches into her own scalp. The delusions that had been lurking beneath the surface rose and consumed whatever remained of her rational mind. What those delusions told her was this: she was a vessel for evil, an irredeemably wicked mother whose failures had corrupted her children's souls. She became convinced that Satan had taken up residence inside her, and that her children, left in her care, were condemned to an eternity of suffering. In the logic of her destroyed mind, there was one way, and only one way, to protect them, to send them to heaven before the damage became permanent. On the morning of June 20th, 2001, Russell Yates left for work. Andrea was alone with Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and 6-month-old Mary. What followed happened in the methodical, terrible sequence of a mind operating on the certainty of its own broken convictions. She filled the bathtub. She took each child, one by one, beginning with the youngest. When her eldest son Noah walked in and understood what was happening, he ran. She caught him, brought him back, and held him under the water as he struggled. When it was over, she carried each child to her bed, laid them down, and covered them gently with a sheet. Then she picked up the phone and called 911. Her voice, according to the operator who received the call, was utterly flat. She said she had hurt her children and needed police to come. She then called Russell and told him simply, it was time. The legal battle that followed lasted years and produced 2 separate trials. The first, in 2002, ended in a conviction after a forensic psychiatrist offered testimony that was later proven to be factually false. An appeals court overturned the verdict in 2005. At the second trial, in 2006, the jury heard a fuller accounting of the severity of Andrea's psychosis and returned a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. She was not released. She was committed to Kerrville State Hospital in Texas, where she has remained ever since. As of Tuesday, August 26, 2025, Andrea Yates is 60 years old. She is eligible for annual review, but consistently waives that right, choosing to remain in psychiatric care. She spends her days in therapy, creating artwork, and watching home recordings of Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary, the 5 children she believed, with every broken piece of her mind, that she was saving. If you enjoy dark true crime documentaries and unbelievable real-life cases, subscribe now and join these awesome family. Diane Staudte. There is a particular kind of evil that does not announce itself with rage or impulse. It does not arrive in a moment of passion or snap under the pressure of a single unbearable night. It arrives quietly, with patience, with calculation, and most disturbingly, with a smile. It sits at the dinner table. It refills the glass. It attends the funeral and accepts the condolences. And it goes home afterward and begins planning the next one. Diane Staudte of Springfield, Missouri, was not a woman who looked like a threat to anyone. She was a wife, a mother of 5, a church-going woman in an unremarkable Midwestern home. She was, by every outward measure, ordinary. And that ordinariness was the most dangerous thing about her, because it meant that no one was looking, and no one was looking for a very long time. Mark Staudte was Diane's husband of more than 2 decades. By 2011, the marriage had deteriorated into something Diane apparently found intolerable, not volatile, not dramatic, simply exhausting. She did not want a divorce. She did not want confrontation. She wanted Mark gone, and she wanted it to look like nothing more than a quiet health decline. She began adding antifreeze to his drinks. Antifreeze contains ethylene glycol, a compound that in small repeated doses mimics the symptoms of a range of common illnesses: nausea, confusion, fatigue, organ stress. It is colorless. It is nearly tasteless when diluted, and it kills slowly enough that by the time a doctor begins asking serious questions, the damage is already irreversible. Mark Staudte fell ill in the spring of 2011. His symptoms were puzzling, but not immediately alarming, the kind of gradual deterioration that attending physicians attributed to various medical explanations as they worked through possibilities. He died in April of 2011. The death was ruled natural. Diane collected on his life insurance policy, and the case was closed. For a woman who had just committed the perfect crime, the temptation to use the same method again must have been overwhelming. And so she did. Her son Sean was 26 years old and living with a developmental disability that required ongoing care. He was, by Diane's apparent assessment, another burden, another drain, another person standing between her and whatever version of freedom she had constructed in her mind. She began poisoning Sean with the same method she had used on his father. He deteriorated rapidly, suffered serious neurological damage, and died in 2012. Once again, the death drew no immediate suspicion. Once again, Diane moved forward. What investigators would later find most chilling was that Diane had not stopped at 2. Her daughter Sarah, 24 years old, had also begun experiencing the same constellation of troubling symptoms: confusion, physical weakness, a decline that her doctors could not easily explain. Sarah survived only because the timeline of her poisoning was interrupted. By the time authorities closed in, she had already suffered lasting neurological harm, but she was alive. 3 members of the same household had fallen critically ill or died, and Diane Staudte had been present through all of it, attentive, composed, and apparently caring. What broke the case open was not a dramatic confession or a whistleblower. It was a pharmacist. A pharmacist in the Springfield area noticed an unusual pattern in medical records and toxicology results connected to the Staudte family and contacted authorities. Investigators ordered a full review, and the presence of ethylene glycol antifreeze was confirmed in the surviving victim's system. The bodies of Mark and Sean were exhumed. Testing confirmed what Diane had done. Authorities also discovered that her daughter Rachel, then a teenager, had been aware of what her mother was doing and had actively assisted her, reportedly motivated by the same cold desire to be rid of family members she found burdensome. Diane Staudte was arrested in 2013. Faced with the weight of forensic evidence, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree assault. The courtroom that heard the details of her crimes sat in near silence as prosecutors walked through the timeline, the patience of it, the repetition of it, the fact that she had returned to the same method, with the same calm, on multiple members of her own family. In 2014, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rachel Staudte, who cooperated with prosecutors, received a lesser sentence. Diane Staudte remains incarcerated in Missouri. Her case is studied not for its complexity, but for its clarity, a clear-eyed, premeditated decision to eliminate the people she was supposed to love most, one poisoned glass at a time, in a house where no one ever suspected that the most dangerous place to sit was at the family dinner table. Dee Blanchard. It began as a story that made strangers open their wallets and their hearts. A devoted single mother, pushing her wheelchair-bound daughter through life with a smile that never seemed to waver. A little girl with a shaved head, enormous eyes, and a list of medical conditions. So long, it seemed almost impossible that one small body could carry all of them. Leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, vision impairment, hearing loss, feeding tubes, breathing machines, and a childhood spent almost entirely inside hospital rooms and charitable fundraisers. People who encountered Dee Blanchard and her daughter Gypsy Rose described them the same way every time: an inspiration, a testament to a mother's unconditional love, a reminder that some people carry burdens the rest of us could not imagine. What nobody understood for nearly 2 decades was that the burden Gypsy Rose Blanchard was carrying had been invented, maintained, and aggressively protected by the one person in the world who was supposed to keep her safe from harm. Claudine Blanchard, known to everyone as Dee Dee, was born in Louisiana in 1967. By the time her daughter Gypsy Rose arrived in July of 1991, Dee Dee had already demonstrated a pattern of behavior that those closest to her found troubling but difficult to name. She was controlling. She was theatrical about illness her own and those of people around her. She had a long history of fabricating or exaggerating medical conditions to draw attention, sympathy, and assistance from others. When Gypsy was born, Dee Dee told doctors almost immediately that something was wrong with the baby, and from that point forward, she never stopped. The diagnoses multiplied year after year. Gypsy Rose, according to her mother, could not walk, could not eat solid food, had the cognitive development of a young child, and required constant, intensive medical supervision. Dee Dee moved them from Louisiana to Missouri, in part because the distance made it harder for anyone who knew their history to raise questions. She enrolled Gypsy in treatment programs, underwent surgeries on her daughter's behalf, and accepted help from charitable organizations, housing assistance programs, and fundraisers with a gratitude that seemed entirely sincere. The Make-A-Wish Foundation granted Gypsy a wish. Habitat for Humanity built them a home. They attended events, gave interviews, and smiled for photographs the devoted mother and her fragile, courageous daughter. But Gypsy Rose could walk. She had always been able to walk. Her teeth had not fallen out naturally. Dee Dee had denied her proper dental care until the damage was irreversible, giving Dee Dee another visible condition to point to. The feeding tube had been surgically inserted not because Gypsy could not eat, but because Dee Dee had insisted to doctors that she could not. The medications Gypsy was given suppressed her natural development and caused side effects that generated new symptoms, which generated new diagnoses, which generated new procedures. Every doctor who grew suspicious was replaced with another. Every institution that asked too many questions was left behind. Dee Dee controlled every word Gypsy spoke to medical professionals. She controlled her clothing, her appearance, her contact with the outside world, and her understanding of her own body. Gypsy Rose Blanchard grew up genuinely uncertain about what was real and what her mother had constructed around her. The first crack appeared when Gypsy discovered the internet and, through it, a world that Dee Dee had worked hard to keep beyond her reach. She began communicating secretly with a young man from Wisconsin named Nicholas Godejohn, whom she had met through an online Christian dating website. Over the course of their relationship, Gypsy disclosed the truth about her situation to Godejohn, that she was not sick, that her mother controlled her completely, and that she saw no other way out. What began as a desperate search for connection gradually became something far more dangerous. In June of 2015, Godejohn traveled to the Blanchard home in Springfield, Missouri. While Gypsy waited in another room, he entered Dee Dee's bedroom and stabbed her multiple times. Dee Dee Blanchard died in her bed. She was 48 years old. Gypsy Rose and Godejohn fled to Wisconsin, where they were arrested days later after Gypsy's Facebook account posted a message that alarmed people who knew them. Godejohn was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Gypsy Rose pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years. She was released on parole in December of 2023, having served 8 years. The case of Dee Dee Blanchard permanently changed the way medical professionals and child welfare systems discuss Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now formally known as factitious disorder imposed on another. It is a story not about a dramatic criminal, but about the quiet, methodical destruction of a child carried out in full view of a world that mistook control for love and suffering for devotion. Tiffany Moss. There are crimes that disturb us because they are chaotic, impulsive, or born from circumstances we struggle to fully understand. And then there are crimes that disturb us on an entirely different level, crimes that are slow, deliberate, and sustained over such a long period of time that they force a question most people are deeply uncomfortable asking. How does a child disappear in plain sight? Not vanish from a street or an open field, but disappear from the inside of a home, inside a family, inside the daily routine of a life that continued normally for everyone else under the same roof. Imani Moss was 10 years old when she took her last breath in Gwinnett County, Georgia. She weighed 32 pounds, the average weight of a healthy 3-year-old, and the woman responsible for bringing her to that point had spent months making sure that while Imani wasted away in the darkness of her own home, every other child in that house was fed, clothed, and cared for without interruption. That deliberate contrast, that careful, chosen distinction between the child who mattered and the child who did not, is what makes the case of Tiffany Moss something that refuses to be filed away and forgotten. Imani Moss was the biological daughter of Iman Moss, who had married Tiffany sometime after Imani's birth. The couple lived together in Lawrenceville, Georgia, with their children, and to the outside world, the household appeared functional enough to avoid intervention. Imani, however, had been removed from the home at an earlier point by child welfare services due to concerns about her treatment, and had subsequently been returned, a decision that would haunt the case and the system that made it for years. Afterward, when Imani came back to that house, she came back to Tiffany Moss, and whatever temporary protection the removal had offered her was gone. What followed was a prolonged and calculated campaign of starvation. Tiffany Moss withheld food from Imani systematically while continuing to feed her biological children as normal. Imani was confined, isolated from the routines that the other children in the home participated in freely, and denied the basic physical nourishment that every child requires simply to remain alive. The cruelty was not frenzied or reactive, it was consistent, sustained, and chosen every single day over the course of months. By the time Imani's body gave out in October of 2013, she had been reduced to a weight that reflected not illness, not genetics, not any medical condition, but the precise and measurable consequence of deliberate deprivation. When Imani died, Tiffany Moss did not call for help. She did not dial emergency services or alert anyone in a position to intervene. Instead, she and Iman Moss attempted to destroy the evidence of what had happened inside that house. They placed Imani's body in a trash can and set it on fire in the backyard. It was a neighbor who noticed the smoke and the smell, and it was that neighbor's decision to contact authorities that brought investigators to the Moss property. What they found when they arrived, and what the subsequent autopsy confirmed, was a child who had been starved to a condition that medical examiners described in terms that prosecutors would later bring before a jury in careful, deliberate detail. Iman Moss cooperated with investigators and ultimately pleaded guilty, accepting a life sentence in exchange for his testimony. Tiffany Moss made a different choice. She chose to represent herself at trial, dismissing her attorneys and standing before the court as her own advocate in a case built almost entirely on evidence of what she had done to a 10-year-old child. Her decision to self-represent meant that she cross-examined witnesses, including those who testified about the condition of Imani's body. It meant she addressed the jury directly. It also meant that when the time came for closing arguments, she delivered none standing before the jury, saying nothing and sitting back down. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, including malice, murder, and cruelty to children. When the penalty phase arrived, Tiffany Moss again declined to present any mitigating evidence or argument on her own behalf. The jury recommended the death penalty. In April of 2019, A Gwinnett County judge formally sentenced Tiffany Moss to death, making her only the second woman in the history of Georgia to receive a death sentence. She currently sits on death row, having offered no public remorse, no explanation, and no acknowledgement of what Imani endured inside a home where every other child was treated as a child deserved to be treated. Imani Moss deserved that too. She deserved a plate of food, a warm room, and a mother who saw her. She got none of those things. And the woman who made that choice is now waiting for a justice that Imani never had the chance to ask for herself. Lori Vallow Daybell. There is a version of this story that sounds like fiction. A woman of deep religious conviction, a charismatic man preaching the end of the world, 2 children who stood in the way of a new life, and a belief system so detached from reality that it reframed murder as a spiritual necessity. If a screenwriter submitted this story to a production company, they might be told it was too far-fetched, too extreme, too difficult for an audience to accept as plausible human behavior. But Tylee Ryan and Joshua Vallow were not characters in a screenplay. They were real children, 17 and 7 years old, respectively, and their mother did not grieve their absence. She went to Hawaii. She bought a new wardrobe. She posed for photographs on the beach with the man she had married weeks after her previous husband died, under circumstances that investigators would later find deeply troubling. And when police came asking where her children were, Lori Vallow Daybell looked them in the eye and told them she had no idea. Lori Vallow was born in 1973 and spent much of her adult life moving through various Christian communities, presenting herself as a devoted mother and woman of faith. She had 5 children across multiple marriages and by most external accounts appeared to be a warm, engaged parent. But somewhere in the years approaching 2019, her belief system underwent a radical transformation. She became deeply involved in fringe religious teachings that centered on a specific and disturbing idea that certain people could be taken over by dark spirits and effectively cease to be the person they once were. In this framework, a person identified as dark was no longer considered truly human. They were a vessel, an obstacle, something to be dealt with rather than loved. The man at the center of this ideology was Chad Daybell, an author of self-published religious fiction who had built a small but devoted following around his teachings about the end times. When Lori and Chad found each other, they recognized in one another a shared and escalating extremism. Chad's wife, Tammy Daybell, died suddenly in October of 2019, initially ruled a natural death. Just 2 weeks later, Lori's estranged husband, Charles Vallow, had already been shot and killed in Arizona months earlier, in July of 2019, by Lori's brother, Alex Cox, in what was claimed at the time to be self-defense. Within weeks of Tammy's death, Lori and Chad were married in Hawaii. They were photographed, smiling in the surf. They appeared, to anyone who did not know what had just happened, to be 2 people at the beginning of something joyful. Tylee and Joshua were not in those photographs. They were not anywhere. When investigators from Rexburg, Idaho, began making inquiries in November of 2019, Lori told them the children were safe and with family. She could not produce them. She could not provide a consistent explanation for their whereabouts. The case attracted national attention as the months passed and the children remained missing. In June of 2020, law enforcement executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's rural property in Salem, Idaho. Buried on the grounds, in separate locations, were the remains of Tylee Ryan and Joshua Vallow. Tylee's remains showed evidence of burning. Joshua, who went by JJ, had been buried in a plastic bag. Investigators pieced together a timeline that was as methodical as it was devastating. JJ Vallow was believed to have been killed in late September of 2019. Tylee Ryan is believed to have been killed just days before that. In the weeks and months that followed, Lori had enrolled JJ in school using another child's identity, continued collecting his disability payments, and traveled to Hawaii with Chad, as though the life she had left behind in Idaho had been cleanly resolved. Friends and family who asked about the children received vague, shifting answers. The ideology that Lori and Chad had built around themselves provided its own internal justification. The children, in the language of their belief system, had been reassigned or were no longer who they appeared to be. Lori Vallow Daybell was convicted in May of 2023 on 2 counts of first-degree murder, one count of conspiracy to commit murder, and additional charges related to the death of Charles Vallow's previous wife. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On each murder count, the sentences to run consecutively. She showed no visible emotion during sentencing. Chad Daybell was tried separately and convicted in June of 2024 on all counts, including first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. As of Tuesday, August 26, 2025, Lori Vallow Daybell remains in an Idaho correctional facility. Having never offered a public explanation for what happened to Tylee and Joshua, the two children she once held, raised, and then chose to erase in the name of a belief that the rest of the world recognized, plainly and immediately, as the justification of the unjustifiable. Lacey Spears, consider what it means to document your child's suffering, not to record it privately in the desperate journal of a parent searching for answers, but to broadcast it, to build an audience around it, to cultivate sympathy from strangers, to grow a following on the back of a little boy's pain. Consider what kind of mind sits beside a sick child in a hospital room and thinks first about how to frame the photograph. Lacey Spears did not arrive at her crimes in a moment of crisis or collapse. She constructed them deliberately, over years, with the patient attention of someone who understood exactly what she was doing and exactly what it was earning her. The attention was the point. The sympathy was the currency. And her son Garnett, 5 years old, and trusting in the way that only small children can be, was the instrument through which she collected both right up until the moment his body could no longer survive what she was putting into it. Lacey Spears was born in 1986 in Alabama and spent her early adulthood moving between states with a restlessness that those who knew her struggled to fully explain. She had Garnett in 2009, and from almost the beginning, she began presenting him to the world as a medically fragile child in need of constant care. She created social media accounts dedicated to documenting his health struggles. She posted updates to Facebook and a blog with the regularity and emotional texture of someone performing grief for an audience, sharing photographs of Garnett in hospital beds, describing his symptoms in detail, and receiving in return the outpouring of concern and encouragement that had apparently become essential to her sense of self. She sought out online communities of parents with sick children. She inserted herself into those communities as a fellow sufferer. She was, to everyone who followed her story, an extraordinary and selfless mother doing everything possible to care for her chronically ill son. Garnett's medical history was, by any measure, unusual. He suffered from chronic ear infections, required the placement of a feeding tube, and experienced a pattern of sudden and unexplained health crises that sent him to the emergency room with disturbing regularity. Each crisis generated new posts, new sympathy, new engagement from the audience Lacey had cultivated. Each hospitalization brought nurses and doctors who found Garnett to be a sweet and gentle child, and found his mother to be devoted, knowledgeable, and almost unnervingly calm in the face of each new emergency. What nobody connected, for years, was that Garnett's crises followed a consistent pattern. They happened when Lacey had uninterrupted access to him, and they resolved when that access was interrupted. What Lacey was doing, investigators would later determine, was introducing sodium salt directly into Garnett's feeding tube in quantities far beyond what the human body, and particularly a child's body, can safely process. Sodium poisoning produces a distinctive and devastating set of symptoms: confusion, seizures, neurological deterioration. It is also, critically, a finding that can initially appear consistent with a range of other conditions, which is precisely what made it so difficult to identify and so easy to sustain over an extended period of time. Lacey understood enough about medical care, having spent years immersed in the language and environment of her son's supposed illness, to navigate the system with a confidence that repeatedly delayed suspicion. In January of 2015, Garnett was admitted to Nyack Hospital in New York in critical condition. His sodium levels were catastrophically elevated. Despite the efforts of medical staff to stabilize him, he suffered severe and irreversible brain damage. He was transferred to Westchester Medical Center, where he died on January 23, 2015. He was 5 years old. Nurses at the hospital had already begun to notice that Garnett's condition worsened, specifically during periods when his mother had been alone with him. They alerted hospital security. Footage reviewed after his death showed Lacey entering his room with a bag and administering something through his feeding tube shortly before his condition deteriorated to the point of no return. The investigation that followed built a case around years of medical records, social media posts, witness testimony, and forensic evidence. Lacey Spears was arrested in January of 2015, shortly after Garnett's death. She was charged with second-degree murder and first-degree assault. At trial in 2015, prosecutors walked the jury through the full timeline of what Lacey had done, the years of manufactured illness, the careful performance of maternal devotion, the social media documentation of a suffering she was causing. The jury convicted her on both counts. She was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Lacey Spears remains incarcerated in New York. Garnett Paul Spears, who loved trains and superheroes and trusted his mother completely, deserved a childhood. What he received instead was 5 years of pain, manufactured by the one person the entire world assumed was fighting hardest to end it, Casey Anthony. There are verdicts that close a case, and there are verdicts that open a wound. The kind of wound that does not heal cleanly, that gets discussed at dinner tables and debated in law schools and revisited every few years when something reminds the public that justice and truth are not always the same thing. On July 5, 2011, a jury in Orlando, Florida, returned a not guilty verdict on the charge of first-degree murder against Casey Anthony, and the collective reaction across the United States was something close to disbelief. Not the quiet, reflective disbelief of a close case with genuinely ambiguous evidence, but the loud, visceral disbelief of a public that had watched 31 days of documented behavior and arrived at a conclusion that felt, to millions of people, impossible to square with what had been presented. A 2-year-old girl was dead. Her mother had not reported her missing for over a month, and the woman who stood in that courtroom and walked out free had spent those 31 days at parties, in nightclubs, and in the arms of a boyfriend, while her daughter was somewhere no one was looking because no one had been told to look. Kaylee Marie Anthony was born in August of 2005 to Casey Anthony, who was 19 years old at the time, and living with her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, in Orlando, Florida. Kaylee was, by every account from people who knew her, a bright, playful, and deeply loved little girl adored by her grandparents and, publicly at least, by her mother. The family existed in the complicated emotional geometry of a household, where tensions ran beneath the surface, where roles had blurred over time, and where Casey's relationship with her parents swung between dependence and defiance. Whatever the internal dynamics of that household, the world outside it saw a family holding together around a small child who seemed to be thriving. The last confirmed sighting of Kaylee Anthony alive was June 16, 2008. On that day, according to phone records and witness accounts, she was with her mother. After that, she was gone. Not reported gone, not searched for, simply absent from the life she had been living, while Casey Anthony continued hers without visible interruption. She moved in with her boyfriend, Anthony Lazaro. She went to nightclubs. She participated in a hot body competition at a local bar. She went shopping. She told her parents, when they asked about Kaylee, that the child was with a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. She told them she had been at work, at Universal Studios, a job she had not actually held for over 2 years. She constructed a daily fiction about a life that did not exist and delivered it to her family with a consistency that required active, sustained effort. It was Cindy Anthony who finally called 911 on July 15, 2008, 31 days after Kaylee was last seen alive. In that call, Cindy told the operator that the car Casey had been driving smelled like a dead body had been inside it. Casey had dismissed the smell as a dead squirrel that had gotten into the engine. Investigators who processed the car later confirmed the presence of chloroform, human decomposition, and a hair consistent with Kaylee Anthony in the trunk. Casey, when questioned, produced a story about the nanny and the Universal Studios job that collapsed within hours under the simplest scrutiny. She led detectives to the studio, walked them through the building as though she still worked there, and finally admitted, when confronted with evidence, that she did not, that she had been lying. What she could not adequately explain was where her daughter was. Kaylee Anthony's remains were discovered on December 11, 2008, in a wooded area less than a quarter-mile from the Anthony family home. She was found in a laundry bag inside a trash bag. Duct tape was recovered in association with her skeletal remains. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. Forensic evidence presented at trial included the chloroform found in the car trunk, internet searches on the Anthony family computer for methods of using chloroform, and the duct tape consistent with a brand found in the Anthony home. Casey Anthony was acquitted of murder, manslaughter, and child abuse in July of 2011, convicted only of 4 counts of lying to law enforcement. She was released from jail within 2 weeks, having already served the equivalent of her sentence. She has lived a largely private life since, giving occasional interviews in which she maintains her innocence and expresses what she describes as her own theories about what happened to Kaylee. Kaylee Marie Anthony was 2 years old. She weighed less than 30 pounds. She was found in a garbage bag in the woods, a short walk from the home where her grandmother had been desperately waiting for answers. Whatever a jury decided in that courtroom, a child was lost, and the 31 days of silence that preceded the search for her have never been satisfactorily explained by the one person who was with her last. Megan Huntsman. There are secrets that live in the walls of a house. Not metaphorically, not in the literary sense of old guilt and unspoken tension, but physically contained within the structure of a home, locked away in the spaces that families use for storage and that visitors never think to examine. For nearly a decade, a garage in Pleasant Grove, Utah, held a secret of that kind. Cardboard boxes, ordinary in appearance, the kind that accumulate in any family home without attracting a second glance. But what was inside those boxes was not ordinary. And the woman who had placed them there had continued living her life in the house attached to that garage, raising children, maintaining a household, and presenting to her neighbors and her community the entirely unremarkable face of a woman with nothing significant to hide. When the boxes were finally opened in April of 2014, the discovery that followed would shake a quiet Utah neighborhood to its foundation and force investigators to confront a timeline of events so prolonged and so methodically concealed that it redefined what the word secret is capable of. Containing. Megan Huntsman was born in 1974 and spent most of her adult life in Pleasant Grove, a small city in Utah County known for its close-knit community and the kind of suburban ordinariness that makes it an unlikely setting for what investigators would eventually uncover. She was married to Darren West, with whom she had 3 daughters. The household had its difficulties. Darren West struggled with drug use and was in and out of the picture over the years, but the family was known to neighbors, if they were known at all, as unremarkable. Megan herself was not a figure who attracted attention or scrutiny. She was simply a woman living in a house on a residential street in a town that had no particular reason to look closely at her. What was happening inside that house, beginning as far back as 1996, was something that the community around her had no framework to anticipate. Over a period of approximately 10 years, Megan Huntsman became pregnant at least 7 times. She concealed each pregnancy. She gave birth to each child alone, without medical assistance, without documentation, and without telling anyone that the pregnancies existed. 6 of those 7 babies were killed at or shortly after birth. Their bodies were wrapped and placed inside individual cardboard boxes. The boxes were stored in the garage of the family home. 1 infant, investigators determined, had been stillborn. The 6 who were not survived long enough to take their first breaths in a world that their mother had already decided they would not be permitted to enter. The discovery came not through investigation or tip, but through the most ordinary of domestic circumstances. Darren West, Megan's estranged husband, had returned to the property to clean it out. In the garage, going through boxes, he found the first package. He called the police. What began as a welfare check became one of the most disturbing crime scene discoveries in Utah history, as investigators systematically worked through the garage and the full scope of what Megan Huntsman had hidden there across nearly 10 years came into view. 7 boxes, 6 confirmed homicides, a timeline stretching from 1996 to 2006. The investigation that followed required forensic analysis to establish the timeline and the cause of death for each infant. Medical examiners determined that the deaths of the 6 children were homicides. Megan Huntsman, when confronted with the evidence, did not attempt to construct an elaborate alternative explanation. she cooperated with investigators and ultimately pleaded guilty to 6 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count for each of the 6 children whose lives had ended inside the home, where she continued to live and shop and exist and breathe for years after placing them in those boxes. The courtroom that heard her sentencing in 2014 sat with the kind of stillness that descends when language begins to feel inadequate to what it is being asked to describe. Prosecutors detailed the span of years, the number of pregnancies, the deliberate concealment of each one, and the decision that had apparently been made 6 separate times to end a life that had barely begun. Megan Huntsman was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison, with the sentences on each count to run consecutively. Her attorney described a woman who had lived in a state of profound dysfunction and psychological damage. The families of those who knew her struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the contents of the boxes in her garage. Megan Huntsman remains incarcerated in Utah. The 6 children she delivered and did not allow to live were given names by investigators and buried with the dignity that their brief existences deserved. They had not been given names before. They had not been given anything at all, not a breath of outside air, not a moment in the light, not a single day in the house where their mother went on living as though they had never existed. If you enjoy dark true crime documentaries and unbelievable real-life cases, subscribe now and join these awesome families.